Welcome, everyone, to InferenceSwap.com. I'm your host, John Pappas, and thank you for joining us in another amazing week to see what God is going to share with us today through His Word and His Gospel. And we're going to talk about a little bit about discipleship, and we're going to jump into that in just a second. First, I want to thank Barney's Hub Bootery, 1198 North Main Street, for being a supporter of this podcast and always helping us out. We want you to go there, 1198 North Main Street in Crown Point, Indiana. They have a BOGO through February going on. That means if you buy one pair of shoe, you get the second one half off. If you buy clothing, you get the second piece of clothing half off. It's an amazing place. It has everything for your whole family. It's a full service place. They mask up and they take that serious because they love people and they're there to serve you. So go to Barney's Hub Brewery, 1198 North Main Street. Hey, I have another amazing announcement. My book, audiobook, is coming out in the next week. I am literally finished with the audio portion. I am now doing the commentary. Should be done in the next couple days. Be finishing that up maybe this afternoon. So be looking for that. If you're a premium member, that is for you. And if you want to be a premium member, all you have to do is go to our website and join, or go to our Podbean app. Podbean app is just a podcasting app. You just download it on your smartphone. You can join us and become a premium member, and it's only $9.99 a month. It's amazing. You want to do that because I have a lot of stuff that I'm working on and that will be coming, and you're going to want to hear that. All right, so I am going to get done with all of this stuff up front, and let's talk about what we have been talking about. Now, I've started this new season, season 2, talking about the gospel, but from a different perspective. In other words, God's judgment. And I do this because I think if we don't have a clear understanding of the gospel, then our proclamation to the world will be off, and the God that we present them will not be the God of the Bible, which seems to be a lot of the case of some of the things that I am pushing back on, and I see this a lot. So in season 2, I've started off with a series on God's judgment. And in episode 1, we talked about inclusion before exclusion. And the reason we did that is because we often make it us and them, right? We think we're in and they're out because we've done a series of rituals. And what we find is as we look at parables of grace, that it's Jesus including everyone, for God so loved the world. So that's really important to our understanding of both grace and both judgment. And that brings us to episode 2, which is God's judgment is the ultimate offer of grace. And that when we look at these judgment things, like as Paul is talking about in the book of Romans through Romans 1 through 3, we often see that, wait a second, the judgment has been put on Jesus. If you look at the thesis statement in Romans 1:16 through 18, and then you read through 2 and you get to the middle of part 3, you find that Jesus became the propitiation, the sacrifice, and the judgment of God, and the wrath of God has been revealed on him and in him. In other words, God took out his wrath on sin on Jesus, and in that judgment, or non-judgment, if you want to call that, actually becomes an offer of grace for everyone. Isn't that amazing? Last week we talked about losing to win, that Jesus came in his earthly ministry, but he did something that we never thought he would do. He came to die. In other words, he came to lose and not to win. And in losing, he wins everything. And we see him identifying with the lost, the least, the last, and the losers of this world. And so if you want to win, you're going to lose. And if you're willing to lose everything, he'll give you everything. And that brings us to today. We're going to talk about God's judgment and the overturning of the court system. And so this is really important. I thought this was another great episode. And I hope you're actually going through these, because these are amazing episodes, you know. And I do this because I want you to be excited like I get excited about these things. So let's jump into it. In Matthew 17, 1 through 13, we experience, as the writers of the gospel present, this obscure passage called the Transfiguration. And that's where Elijah and Moses come to Jesus and basically tell him, man, you're going to die in a month. In about a month from now, you're going to die. And so we now see at the forefront of Jesus' mind is the fulfillment of his Father's redemptive plan. And This isn't something I'm just making up. This is reiterated all over the place from here on out. But if we want to get specific, in a couple verses later, in verses 22 through 23, Jesus reiterates this, where he tells his disciples that he must die, and on the third day he'll be raised again. So in doing so, Jesus now turns his feet and his heart towards Jerusalem. And to this point, it has been evident that Jesus sees himself as an outsider, as a loser. And what's more intriguing, that he's identifying with the losers of the world. So up to this point, he sees everything through his finished work, but now he's going to walk towards that finished work, if that makes sense. And so all of this culminates into a reoccurring theme of death and resurrection. Because of the evidence of Jesus on relating to losers in the world, and the transfiguration where death and resurrection become first and foremost in his mind, we now see Jesus heading toward Jerusalem. But for us as a reader, this idea of death and resurrection becomes the key to our understanding the parables of grace and the parables of judgment. And so as we look at Scripture, we need to interpret those Scriptures through that idea of grace and judgment, or as I would say, death and resurrection, right? And why I'm telling you that, because there's some obscure verses that are coming before us. As Jesus heads towards his death, the writers of the gospel turn their focus towards his death, towards the passion of Christ. But as they do, all of the writers include some remaining bits of Jesus' teaching that they have not addressed. And these passages come across really obscure. And if you look at them at face value, they look like they're almost out of place. But we have to assume they're there because they are to be interpreted through that death and resurrection lens, which is at the foremost thought of Jesus' mind at this point. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second and just sort of rabbit trail. Prior to this, Jesus is living his journey, and he's figuring out a lot of different things, but he's living through understanding that before him, he's going to see the world through his finished work and what he's offering them, which is grace. Now, he's going to die. He's putting his head towards death or resurrection. And so after this, they put some weird scriptures in there, which we're going to look at a couple. And we're going to interpret them through this death and resurrection lens, because I think that's what the writers are hinting that we do. So this is important. So we're going to look at Matthew 19, 3 through 12, and discuss the scripture through the lens of death and resurrection. And I just want to also rabbit trail and say here, like, we often take passages like this and try to interpret them through some other means than what the writers are trying to tell us. And in doing so, we start sprinkling law onto our grace, which is no grace at all. So anyway, I don't want to jump on that. So here's the scripture, Matthew 19, 3 through 12. And it says, "And the Pharisees came to him and tested him by saying, 'Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?' And he answered, 'Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And said, Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one in flesh. So they are no longer two, but they're one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate.' And they said to him, 'Why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and then to send her away?' And he said to them, 'Because of your hardness of hearts, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery.' The disciples said to him, 'If such is the case of a man with his wife, is it not better not to marry?' But he said to them, 'Not everyone can receive what I'm about to say, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so since birth, and there are eunuchs who have been eunuchs by man, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who can receive that receive it.' Wow. You had me till eunuch, right? So let's take a stab at this. Here the Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus, hoping to bring him down in front of everyone on the question of marriage. So they ask him some tough questions, right? They ask him a tough question, and it's always a question of law. And in surprising fashion, Jesus sort of snaps. And it's devastatingly strict what he says to them. In essence, he attacks the Pharisees for tampering with the law that they hope to convict and entrap him with. And so Jesus understands that I think Jesus is very aware the cultural permissible changes that they have made to Moses' law. And he's aware that giving a wife a letter of certificate was permissible. But culturally, what that meant, especially for the women, is if you became an inconvenience or if a man deemed your actions as excessive, he could just give you divorce papers and you're out there on your own in a world that wasn't exactly favorable towards women at the time. So their question, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause, was based on Deuteronomy 24:1. Now, Jesus is aware of all that and sort of what they're saying and what the consequences of that law is. But Jesus is sort of sick and tired of his demonstration and proclamation of grace being challenged at every corner by them through the law. And so he quotes Genesis 1 at him, and basically what God has brought together, let no man separate. In essence, he's implying that since Genesis came first, it meant that they were overlooking the intention of God from the beginning. That scripture that they were quoting at Jesus came later. And that was God's way of accommodating hard and resistant hearts to his intention. So now that we know all this, how do we interpret this passage in light of what we've been learning about God and about Jesus and this death and resurrection? Well, Jesus' focus is on the Pharisees' desire to establish their own righteousness. In other words, to be winners. They are trying to be successful livers of lawful lives by diminishing the law down to the size of their less than obedient lives to God. And before Jesus and before God, that won't wash. So the idea here is the same that Paul brings up later in the book of Romans. If you take a stand on the law is there to condemn you. It doesn't forgive you. It finds you guilty. And Paul tells us, and Jesus is telling us here, no one keeps that law. And it's foolish to base your righteousness and your reward on your justification through the law, because the law will condemn you and it will kill you. So the grace part of this is in light of Jesus, who's on his way to his death and resurrection, a death and resurrection that's for the whole world. It means if they would take him at his word, if they would hear what he's saying, if they would take a stand on Jesus' saving cross, and they believe that he came not to judge the world like they are doing, but to save it, not to examine records, but to erase them, not to enforce charges in the law, but to nail them all to a cross, they would find that he's putting out the court system that is in place in their minds, in their hearts, in their culture. He's putting that court system out forever. And this is what I think we need to understand pertaining to the death and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus peels back, if we want to modernize what he's saying, the masks and the costumes that all of us wear before the world in order to prop ourselves up before the world. He confronts us in the reality he sees us in. He strips all that crap away. And if we will take a stand concerning the truth about ourselves, our naked selves, the ones we see in the mirror, our deeds, our actions, and we're real about them before the Lord, then in light of his death and resurrection, we will find absolution, and that truth will make us free. Now, one of my favorite authors sort of quotes on, he comments on this. He says, do you see what that means? It means that we are saved not by our successes, but in and through our failures, not by our lives, but in our deaths. You see, the masks we wear and the costumes we put on before this world in all of their hiddenness, in all of their successes, are nothing more than moral and spiritual contraptions we climb into to avoid the one thing that can save us, which is our vulnerability, the truth of who we really are. You see, Jesus doesn't care about the titles we hold or the offices we arise to, the roles we assign ourselves in this world, or all of our successes any more than he cares about the names we call each other when we fail. It's he who saves, not our lives. Let me repeat that, because I don't think we distinguish that. We think they're one and the same. It's he, Jesus, who saves, and he's saving us, not our lives. Jesus died for the person, not the clothes, the masks, and the costumes we put on and the roles we play before this world, or that hide us from the bare truth about ourselves from the world. So we must never forget we are the ones who stand before a mirror and we primp ourselves so the world will not see what our faces really look like every morning. We dress ourselves up in our finest clothes. We get our hair cut so we look awesome. And Jesus isn't looking at our $400 suits. He's not looking at the beauty of your nails, your eyelashes, and that great makeup you wear that's done by a beautician. He's not looking at the eyeliner that makes you perfect. All of that stuff is a covering and sort of the lie that we present to the world. But Jesus sees us as we stand in that mirror naked, unpolished, and fully exposed. He sees that person. And let me tell you, I'm a little overweight these days. It ain't looking good in the mirror. Can we say, what is that, mushroom top or whatever the heck that's called? I got some love handles trying to get rid of. This COVID season's killing me. And you know what I'm saying here, man? Like, the very culture we work in, or we go to work to, we're always primping and trying to make ourselves better, which is actually a lie. But Jesus leaves us exposed and he sees who we are. Now, this is exactly what he says to them, and it seems a little overwhelming and a bit much. And that's certainly the reaction by the disciples, because these guys, just like us, always miss the point of what Jesus is saying by a million miles. And so the reaction to what they perceive is a new standard is, well, I guess we're all called to a life of celibacy. Should we live like a eunuch then? And I could just picture Jesus. Can you picture like them going, I guess what all that's left is celibacy, to be a eunuch? That's what you're saying, Jesus? I mean, can you just picture Jesus like turning to them in complete frustration from the frustration of the Pharisees? And that's what he does. He turns from them and focuses that frustration on them. And you get the kind of reaction you see in the entire book of Mark. For example, and this is in the entire book of Mark, and this is I could do a sermon on this or a talk. But in Mark 7:18, Jesus says this kind of thing to them throughout the entire book. He says, "Are you so dull?" And so in the same spirit, he's looking from the Pharisees that he just talked to these guys in that Fred Sanford of Sanford and Son ways, like, you big dummies. Are you not sharp? Are you dull? Do you have no depth in you? Is it possible you live in this much ununderstanding? Do you not even hear the words that are coming out of my mouth? Can you just wow. And I say wow now because I didn't understand until I really dug into this. So I'm just like one of those disciples. So are you probably, right? But Jesus says, the eunuch thing, it's the same question the Pharisees just asked me about divorce. Not getting married is no solution either. You're doing the same thing they're doing. You're just fiddling with the law to live up to the law. You're trying to win by shaving the rules. And that is a sure loss. I think we have to understand that Jesus isn't going to save winners at all. If you're going to try to justify your life before him, you will lose your life. So Jesus is looking at them and saying, like, dudes, who in their right mind is going to be a eunuch just to gain moral high ground? But if that's what your thing is, then go ahead and do that. But, it doesn't do anything. It's not helping you. It's only I that can help you. And I think we see at this point in the game, and from here on out, that Jesus has had it with these kind of private success clubs. Like, I'm going to be a eunuch to gain moral high ground on the rest of the world and present myself before the Lord in that kind of righteousness. You know what I'm saying? He's sick of these righteous private success clubs and all of their admission requirements, man. And so Jesus is coming to say, I have come to save the world. And if you wish to have life, then admit your death, believe in me, move away from your life. Stop trying to live and show me your successes and give me your spiritual resumes. I don't need your moral high ground pursuits. The only thing any of you, any of us, you and I, bring to the table is the one thing we all have, and that's our death. It's pretty amazing how genius God is. Pretty amazing, this kind of teaching when it comes to God's judgment. Now, with all this said, that brings us to another oddball scripture that I wanted to touch on before we get out of here today. And we got a few minutes to do it. But these kind of scriptures, don't they seem out of place when it comes to the idea of Jesus' death or resurrection? It's really about that idea of death or resurrection, not so much divorce. And it's about the idea of justifying ourselves or tweaking the law in order to live up to the law so that we can stay alive and win and beat the law when the law has already beaten us all. But I find as I do this, I get a more profound understanding of the grace and the judgment that God has done and the grace that he's offering, the good news that he's offering. And this particular next account of the Bible is called the blessing of the little children, or let the children come, or however you want to call that. And it's found in Matthew 19, 13, 15, right after this. And it seems like another obscure scripture, but we have to look at it in light of the death and resurrection. So let me read this one to you to just punctuate this good news through the gospel and through God's judgment. It says, then the children were brought to him that he might lay his hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked the people, telling them to get away. And Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven. And then he laid his hands on them and went away. Now again, think about the relation to this scripture to the last scripture, and then these scriptures in relation to the transfiguration. It's just really odd unless you understand this key of death and resurrection. But we got to remember that idea of death and resurrection is in the forefront of Jesus' mind. And so, in light of that, let's look at this. This scripture in particular is one of those that have been painted. I want you to think about this. If you go to a church, this scripture has been painted for us in a succinct way. So if you looked up like Jesus' blessing on the little children, even on Google, you'll see this picture. It's a very modern, wishful picture of the way we think children should be. So it's this happy Jesus laughing with his sweet little kids all on his lap, and he's giving them like a group hug. So that's what we sort of think of when we think of this scripture. Yet if we remove this modern, and by modern I would say Victorian mindset where everything's proper and kids have to be proper, and these kids are beautiful kids that have no problems and beautiful kids that are always well behaved, right? If we get rid of that Victorian mindset, I think we get a clearer picture of what's going on here. See, prior to like the 19th century, children were not looked upon as less sinful creatures than anyone else. You see what I'm saying? Instead, they were just like imperfect little adults who needed basically spanking to get that brattiness out of them, and they needed to be beaten with education to move them along into adulthood. You know what I'm saying? And I say that, we shouldn't beat our kids. You get what I'm saying? Like, spare that rod, spoil the child, because these kids are freaking brats, So We love kids. I'm not talking kids, but we tend to pedestal their innocence rather than seeing the bratty kids that are running around the house knocking over lamps. You know what I'm saying? So childhood in that world was a place that no sane adult actually wanted to stay. And to be honest, they were looked at like a little losers, like, get these kids away from me. And that's crucial to understanding this passage, because Jesus is not being some super nice Boy Scout leader here who says, let the children come to me. You know what I mean? He is using this opportunity before him as he sees these kids to make this death and resurrection, this death, forgiveness, judgment, light point. You get what I'm saying? He's using this as sort of like a real life parable, if you will. So these kids are supposedly brought to Jesus so he could pray with them, yet the disciples, they literally shoo them away. So this wasn't because they were like mean disciples. This is because these kids were not sweet little innocent kids. You get what I'm saying? They're bratty kids. They're making a bunch of noise and breaking things. You know what I mean? And so because they were brats, in essence, they were the discipleship. I mean, the disciples are like, hey, get these kids away. We have a very important rabbi, and he can't be bothered right now with all of this. Look what's going on with these Pharisees. But Jesus takes the opportunity and he rebukes them for being the deciders. Think about this. He rebukes them for being the deciders of who gets to come to him and who doesn't. And he tells them, in essence, let these little losers, these little brats, these little ones that are pests, that annoy everyone, let them come. This is what the plan of salvation is all about. Jesus came for the lost, the least, and the losers of this world. So he's basically going like, why would you prevent such people to come to me? Do not hinder them. So he's looking at the disciples saying, how many times and in how many ways do I have to show you that I'm in the business of saving people, and you don't get to choose who's in or out? Not even for yourselves. And because I am going to go to lose on the cross in my crucifixion, I'm going to take those who will lose and are considered losers with me if they'll put my faith in me. And if they do, that unsuccess will give them a victory through my success of losing. It's crazy, right? Upside down kingdom. So we see that he's showing them that grace is offered to the, quote, losers of this world, and also that he's showing the judgment that who think they're winners, that can prevent these people over here from being out or coming to him. Those are the ones that think they're winners, and those are the ones that will lose. So for them, grace doesn't sell, and you can hardly give it away because it works for losers and not the ones that want to win all the time. It's crazy, right? Now, again, my favorite author, Robert Farrar Capon, suggests the world of winners will buy let me start that again. I just lost my train of thought there. It says, the world of winners will buy lots of moral advice. They'll buy lots of grocers of gilt-edged prohibitions, skids of self-improvement techniques, and a whole truckload of transcendental hot air. But it will not buy free forgiveness, because that threatens to let the riffraff into the supper of the Lamb. And therefore the world of winners will be judged already. That's crazy, right? We don't want this moral, this free grace that gives free forgiveness. We want to control the message, and we want to control the outcome. It's crazy. The Bible states, whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the Son of God. So in essence, the parable of the grubby kids is a way of Jesus showing us in real time what grace and forgiveness and judgment looks like. It's Jesus and God's inescapable judgment of mercy pronounced on the world that would never give mercy, or doesn't even put mercy on their lists. They want to keep those less than moral people away. They want to give them guilt-ridden prohibitions to help them live a life of self-improvement. You see what I'm saying? And so what we find then is because of what Jesus has done, he has broken down our ability to live through the court system, to be law keepers, and to be bookkeepers that keep the laws on somebody else. Jesus comes to take and fulfill that law, and he shows us this over and over again. And he's always condemning those who are trying to manipulate Scripture, manipulate God's law in order to fulfill it, because they won't come and follow him to his death. All right, we're going to leave it there, man. That's our 30 minutes for today. I want to thank you for joining me. I want you to be aware that in the next few days, you will see a book going up there called Screaming in the Wind. I'm so excited to be able to present that to you. I'll have full commentary, and that's for you guys who have supported this ministry and who are premium members. And it's been a lot of work, but I can't wait to get feedback on that from you guys. So be looking for that in the next week, and I guarantee it'll be there. And for those who don't want to be members, you can, I guess, get it maybe through Audible in the future. But I want to encourage you to become a member. It helps us keep going. Hey, we love you. We thank you. That music you've been hearing in the background, that is Junction 715. Go to YouTube and check them out. Go to your favorite streaming app and listen to their music. They got an album that's coming, and I'm telling you, it's coming hard. It's great. So look for that too. Love you guys. Thank you for listening. I hope this breaks down some of the things that you've been taught or taught. And let this proclamation of good news take you to someone this week that you love. Bye, guys.
Lord, here we go again. Wishing I was back where I began. Back when I had a peace of mind. Get me back to a simple kind of life. I know I fought a good fight against my self-foolish pride. Take shot just to feel the burn. Teach my soul to live better. I've been feeling like dust in the wind, drinking from the bottle that's half full of sin. Looking up when I should look within. Chasing angels, demons won't let me in. Oh Lord, here we go again. Conviction got me stumbling. Hit my knees, bow my head to pray. Feeling lost, nothing left to say. I've been feeling like dust in the wind, drinking from the bottle that's half full of sin. Looking up when I should look within. Chasing angels, demons won't let me in. Won't let me in. No salvation, preservation, work towards condemnation. Need redemption, repossession.